Historical, age, beauty, hypothetical.
Okay, good morning, everybody. If you're attending the panel discussion about intentional school culture, please could you move closer? The middle tables and chairs, please. Thank you. So today I have 5 seasoned leaders with me. We will engage in a conversation. I want to spend some time introducing our panelists here. I will start with Mr. John Balsbaugh. Mr. John Balsbaugh has over 25 years of experience as a high school and junior high school teacher. He currently serves as the president of Trinity School, a national network of classical Christian schools. Next is Mr. Eric Cook. So this is Mr. Balsbaugh. So when I call your name, you can just indicate. So that's Mr. Eric Cook. Mr. Eric Cook is the president of the Society for Classical Learning. Mr. Cook has been formally involved with the Society for Classical Learning for over a decade, serving in multiple roles, including executive director and board chair. Previously, he was the head of school at Covenant Classical in Fort Worth, Texas for 13 years before joining Society for Classical Learning. The next person is Mr. Keith Nix. Okay. Mr. Keith Nix has served as of classical and Christian schools and the president of the Board of Academic Advisors for the Classic Learning Initiatives. Next is Mr. Ian Rowe. Mr. Ian Rowe is the founder of Vertex Partnership Academies and a senior fellow at the American Enterprise Institute. In addition to serving 10 years as CEO of a public prep, he has held leadership positions at Teach for America, the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, the White House, and MTV, where he earned 2 public service Emmys. That's really cool when I read that. And the last but not the least is Dr. David Diener. Dr. David Diener is an associate professor of education at Hillsdale College. His previous experience includes 15 years in K-12 at the classroom level, teacher interactions, parents interactions. Whoever wants to go first. Okay.
Sure, I'll start, though this is maybe a bit of a counterintuitive answer. What I would say is whatever the habits for a particular school are, the most important thing is that they just not be adopted.
You do foster are connected to your understanding of the human person and your understanding of the ultimate vision of education. And some of the students pushed back. They said, with the bells, it's not school if there aren't bells. I said, okay, that's clear we were slipping then. If you were connecting the educational enterprise with being told that it was time to go to the bathroom, maybe we need to change our habits. And they've now settled into it a little more. But yeah, so connect the habits to your vision of education, whatever those habits are.
I'll piggyback on that. I was going to share the same bell story. It's representative of the fact that we come into these schools with barnacles. And I think one of the things we have to do is pay attention to all the barnacles that we carry from our own history and our own education. So so much about culture is paying attention to every little liturgy or habit. And what it leads to, when you take away the bells, it elevates the faculty member, the chief storyteller, the artist in the room that can call class to order, that can, it ruins that ability. If a bell rings to tell you when to start and then a bell rings and the kids can just get up, it doesn't have a beginning, it doesn't have a proper beginning, it doesn't have an ending led by the adult in the room. And that's the key. I know others will speak about this, but your school culture is your faculty culture. The faculty culture will define your student culture. And so when you, as a school, I think you've got to determine your practices, name your practices, communicate those practices, and then you need a faculty that really own it and model it and invite the students into the why of what you're doing, not just the what you're doing. But it does start with the faculty. Now the leadership has to equip the faculty, recruit, train, and equip the faculty to play that role.
I'm happy to speak into this as well. We had at our school in Covenant in Fort Worth, we would say the teacher is the text, and we get that from Luke 6:40, which says when the disciple is not above his teacher, but when the disciple is fully trained, he'll be like his teacher. So all the things that we want our students to do, we expect our teachers to embody first. So a few things that were helpful for us, I'll give you 2 examples as it pertains to this school culture piece. One was kind of a back doorway of getting at idealizing the student experience, and it's because we were killing kids with homework. I'm sure none of you have that problem at all. But what we hadn't defined is why we have it and what place it serves in the life of our school. So we went back to the drawing board and we defined 4 things that we felt like idealized the student experience. Number 1 was we wanted to introduce students to the great works. And we chose that word on purpose because what we were doing was trying to exhaust the great works, and in the process we were exhausting our students. The second thing is we wanted to shape students' affections. We wanted them to love learning so they could do it for a lifetime, not be pistol whipped by it and lose that love which would carry on with them forever. Third, we wanted to equip them with the tools of learning so that they could be lifelong learners, which means that the ability to understand, engage, have meaningful dialogue, submit, all of the things, the skills that we wanted to teach them, we made sure that those were part and parcel of their experience at the school. And then the fourth, we used the word invite, because we wanted the students to take ownership and really buy into and deeply own their own learning. We wanted it ultimately to be even a worshipful experience for them. So those are things that we talked to them about, articulated, and made sure that there was common expectations across the school and clarity with our teachers about what that was and how it worked in the classroom.
Great to be here. And so on this question of culture, this past August we launched Vertex Partnership Academies, which is a virtues-based international baccalaureate high school in the Bronx, organized around the 4 cardinal virtues of courage, justice, temperance, and wisdom. And so we are literally in the throes right now of orchestrating the culture that we want and having these cardinal virtues really permeate everything that we do. We've heard a lot this morning from Catherine Birbelsing, who runs the Michaela Community School, and I visited her school about a month ago in England, and it's incredible. And so in subsequent conversations, what are the documents that describe your culture? And she said, there really aren't documents. There's a feeling, like she said this morning. And it's challenging because once you have a culture established, it's in the water, it's in the air. So we're at a period right now where we really have to make the implicit explicit. And I think that's something very important as we think about intentionality. I'm the chairman of the board of Spence Chapin, which is one of the country's oldest adoption agencies, which, as you might imagine, adoption is an incredibly complex, enormously emotional process where people are making life decisions about whether or not to create an adoption plan for their child. And what we've learned in this process is that there has to be something called the Spence Chapin Way for how we assimilate young women typically into a process where they're making this enormous decision, have to know all of their options. And similarly, similar with prospective parents, there's a process, and that ordered process is what makes it so that you can have this incredible exchange and this incredible human experience. And there are a lot of parallels to what we see and what we want to build in our school. So the most important thing, I think, for what we're envisioning in our culture that's really grounded in these 4 cardinal virtues is that there's, we start with the why, and I'll end this opening comment with this, which is that everything we do has to link back to one of these 4 cardinal virtues in some meaningful way. And so our students, we started the year being a bit more liberal on cell phone policy, where we allowed kids to have cell phones in the classroom and essentially trusting them to moderate themselves. That didn't go well. And so we've now become much more strict. Cell phones can't come out. We, in fact, collect them. But the way that we described why we were making this change was that we grounded this in our cardinal virtue of temperance and self-moderation and self-constraint, and that this is a practice. We're helping you develop the ability to not be so connected to this device that you can focus your mind in class. And there was something very powerful about explaining it in that way, because A, there was a reason, and B, it was grounded in something that we've been talking about as critical to the school.
Maybe I'll just wrap up this first round by drawing this together. Many of the things have already been said. In that, I think a lot of times we think about culture, it's easy for school administrators to think about culture as something sort of on the side or soft, right? I mean, so much time is spent on the financial aspect of the school, or the curriculum, or the administrative structure, or the policies, right? These kinds of things. And I would argue, and I think everyone would on this panel, that culture is not anything less than essential for mission delivery. That is to say, within a classical school, we have a vision of what we're trying to do, of the goals, the purposes of the education that we provide. And given an anthropology, given an understanding of the human being that recognizes the importance of habit and of practice and of these daily and weekly and monthly and annual liturgies, it is impossible to form hearts and to direct souls and to shape loves and these things that we say we're trying to do, cultivate virtues, without recognizing the absolute central, essential role that culture plays. And so I think it's maybe impossible to overstate the importance and the attention that schools should very intentionally pay to culture. And I say intentionally because there's going to be a culture one way or the other, right? It's not that you get to say, oh, well, now we're going to focus on creating a culture. The culture's already there. So it's a question of what are the things that you intentionally implement in order to cultivate students and faculty toward the goals that you have. And again, I think Keith's point about the importance of faculty culture also, and there's great data on this, right, that we have that shows this to be true, that the faculty culture is what really leads into the student culture and the student experience.
Wow, lots of good stuff here. I'll kind of summarize what I heard, because remember I told you in the back that this is a learning experience for me as well, and so I'm taking notes. When I took over Lincoln, which was about 7 years ago, Lincoln was the baby of the family, and some mistakes were made here and there. Not by great hearts or anything, but Lincoln did not have stability in leadership when I got there. And I had an opportunity to observe Lincoln as a bystander for about a year. And one of the things that I noticed before I jumped in as headmaster was the culture, you know, that the intentionality that I felt. There was something that was said, we must not about undoing bad habits. There are also bad habits, and so we have to be conscious of that. I heard Mr. Nix say, paying attention to habits. At my school this year, our thematic goal is passionately committed to instilling habits of excellence. And as we were going into the year, as I was reflecting, I started thinking about something that you said, Mr. Rowe, that we have to make the implicit explicit, right? And so I started asking myself that I could stand in front of my teachers all day and say, we want to passionately instill habits of excellence. What does that look like? And so in my own quiet moments, I went back to my notes that I had written the entire school year, and I would see things like, I can't believe I walked the hallways from the beginning to the end and no student said hi to me. I can't believe 3 students opened the door for me. I can't believe 3 students passed by me and they nearly just shut the door on me. I make those statements along the way as I do my culture work. And so when I went back to my notes, I realized that, okay, if I want the teachers to instill habits of excellence, what were the habits that I paid attention to, which was what you said. We need to pay attention. We need to undo habits. I'm like, okay, manners is no longer something that my students find attractive. Okay, that's a habit of excellence that I want the teachers to zero in on. Someone also talked about the tools of learning. I'm like, when we're doing traffic duty after school, I would hear like 5 to 10 boys, the moment they jump in their parents' car, Dad, can I have your cell phone? Mom, did you bring my iPad? And in my mind, I'm like, I mean, you could bring out your book and quickly finish your reading homework instead of asking for cell phones. Or while they're waiting for the older siblings, mom would quickly give the younger one a cell phone. And so in my notes, I realized that, you know what, we're losing a love of learning. And that's a habit of excellence. When I was growing up, when my mom wants to give me a consequence, she takes my books away. She bans me from going to the shelves, right? And these are the things we want to bring back into the classroom. So we added love of learning as a habit of excellence that we wanted to work on. You talked about shaping their hearts. This year, well, there were several notes that I made from the previous year where I would look at the playground and a child falls down and the friends are laughing. And I'm like, what happened to empathy? That's a habit of excellence. When someone is in distress, how do you respond to that? So we added empathy to the list. And I generated a list of about 6 things. First, obedience. Why are you arguing? Just get the work done. Visible compliance, things like that. And so when I hear you all speak today, it just gladdens my heart that everything you're saying aligns with some of the habits that many of us are instilling on our campuses at Great Hearts. But I have a follow-up question. To a large extent, I feel that and I completely agree with you, Mr. Nix, that the faculty, they are the custodians of culture. It's very easy to empower, not very easy, it's easier to empower the teachers than the parents. We have professional development time after school every Wednesday. I have several support systems at the network level that can come in and help my teachers. But my heart just breaks for the parents. What suggestions do you have regarding partnering with parents to instill habits and routines at home, and how the school can partner with parents?
I'll take a stab to start with. I think from the very beginning, as you define your school and define flourishing, which from the beginning you have to help parents understand this is not what they look like at age 18. We're going for something much longer, much further. So giving parents the long view and in the onboarding process, help them know that unless they participate in cooperation at home, what they want us to do for their children won't work. And so the 3 things that we focus on screen time at home, we focus on dinners around the table, and their church commitment and practice. And also the 4th would be documenting reading outside of required schoolwork. We ask parents on an annual basis to report on those things before they re-enroll. So you've got to tell us what your home life is like, how you're protecting mealtime. So we try to do things as a school to not get in the way of mealtime, the way we organize our after-school athletics and activities right after school so that we're not occupying their children into the evening, the way we talk about travel sports or other things. We're just very bold to say These are things that if you practice at home or don't practice, I would commend Justin Early's book, Habits of the Household. He wrote the book Common Rule a few years back, but his new book last year, Habits of the Household, is really good, especially for young parents. It really causes parents to think hard and deeply about what the practices and routines are at home. That language, because it's the language we're using at school, becomes beautiful if it's consistent, and the students see this consistent partnership that we're agreeing on. But you have to agree on the ends, what flourishing looks like. That's why portrait of the graduate statements that are well done, a lot are not well done. A lot are too ambitious, they're too idealistic, in your word. We've got to be clear. Students aren't going to be fully formed at 18. But what does well-formed or in a good formation process look like? And defining that and keeping that in front of parents. So you're saying, remember, we're doing this together.
That's right.
And putting yourself to be held accountable to those standards. Your culture is, who you are, what we do, how we behave. That's ultimately what it's. So we have to be good at saying what we expect from ourselves so we can be held accountable. So anyway, you end up with that mutual accountability toward these ideas of human flourishing.
That's great. And what I'm hearing you say is that we cannot allow parents be passive on our campuses. They're active participants in the education of their children, which is something that I appreciate a lot about Great Hearts. Well, we'll move on to the next question. How does the school then convey a vision for human flourishing that translates into 21st century practices? And this has specifically, what does classical have to do with the ubiquitous internet, social media, our new partners in education, our new partners, unwanted partners in raising our children? I mean, they're seeping into our school culture. How does the school convey that vision of human flourishing with all these distractions coming from?
Well, I think just like there are a lot of ways in which classical education is based on a set of assumptions about what education is that run contrary to implicit assumptions in the broader culture that parents may not even realize that they've imbibed. I think the same is true on some of these issues. And so, like Keith's example of just bringing it to the fore of a conversation with parents, that how you handle screens or sitting around the table together affects the culture of your home. I think giving parents data on these things and the way in which, you mentioned social media, or these things are affecting today's youth. There's increasing data about those effects in terms of psychological well-being, in terms of the way that it affects their educational experience. So helping parents to even just question what they may not even know to question, right? Or helping them to understand the importance of, say, at the younger ages, reading books aloud to their children. Many schools have that is just part of the homework, right? That part of the homework is that parents read for X number of minutes to the child. And then giving them an explanation of why we do this. Again, how does this tie into our mission as a school? And so giving parents the tools, practical tools, to help them in some ways work against the culture or in a different, march to the beat of a different drummer, as it were, or just not accept these tacit assumptions about, the way you could get your child to be quiet is to hand them a screen, for example. Giving them tools, helping them to know, and again, always aligning it with what is the broader vision of what we're trying to accomplish. What do you want for your child? How are we as a school partnering with that? What are the virtues and the character and the kind of person that you want them to become? And there are lots of great resources out there, to help them do that. I think it's interesting. One final comment. Sherry Turkle, in her book Alone Together, why we expect more of technology and less from each other. She has a great line in that book where she says that this is the first generation that doesn't assume that simulation is second best. So that's, you could have a whole parent seminar on that. What does it mean to help our students engage with reality? And how is what we're doing as a classical school geared toward helping them to understand reality and be able to engage in it well? And that as a means to human flourishing and a life well lived.
And if I could just add something real quick there. My experience is that increasingly the students may be our partners in that because they know they are not thriving and they just don't know how to stop. So they know that, when their text message thread is going, that somebody else has started another parallel text message thread to talk about them, and they're just anxious what's going on. So they are starting to feel it and wish, I think, to partner with us, and we need to help them do that.
Yeah, and I would just say the approach to technology is just one of many, many aspects to discuss, because it all goes back to this idea of making the implicit explicit. For us, what is the Vertex way for faculty, for families, for kids, whether it's technology or anything else, right? You know, every prospective teacher that applies to Vertex, you know, I've done several debates now on critical race theory on C-SPAN, where I take on the ideology and I think in a very constructive way, destroy it. But every teacher that applies to Vertex has to watch those debates, and then we have a discussion about, viewpoint diversity is very important to us. Can you create this kind of dialogue in your own classroom when debating contentious topics, right? That's something that we expect. For our families, we can't have that level of diversity and engagement if your kids are on a cell phone at school or at home, right? And so the Vertex Way is one in which we're really engaged in discussion. We don't shut down debates, but when we have debates, it's based on knowledge and information that is not derived from 140 character exchanges with your friends, you know? So it all goes back to what is it that we're seeking to accomplish? What are the cardinal virtues? And in this case, again, as I said before, temperance is a powerful element as relates to self-restraint. But all of it comes back to, in our case, what is the Vertex Way that helps us answer questions on technology or anything else?
Can I speak to this as well?
Of course.
So one of the ways that we started at Covenant was defining the partnership, and of course, being a Christian school, we communicate with parents that it's their responsibility, God-given responsibility, to raise their children, the nurture admonition of the Lord, and their partnership with us is an extension of that. So they have ownership, responsibility right from the beginning. So we want them to invest in that. So we want them also to understand that we have a culture of learning and a culture of peace at the school. The culture of peace was very important, and we made it very clear and had the Covenant way, as it were, of how those issues were to be resolved. So if there was an issue, you go directly to the person. We had what I call the no hand grenade policy at the school, which was you can't send the angry email. Nobody answers
One, then you're waiting and resolve issues in that way. By the way, most of them, turns out Jesus was right, and all of them, or most of them are resolved in that manner. So that's a really important way in which we engage with the community and set the tone really for the entire school community, not just the parents, but the students as well, who learn the same principles when they get to the middle school. And then in terms of the culture of learning, we had ongoing expectations for our faculty, for our students, and for our families about their engagement level and understanding about the values and the vision of the school. So not only did we offer parent education, we required that as part of their participation and partnership at the school.
That's great. I love the theme of engaging with the parents. And I know that Catherine said that this morning, that, she said, I have meetings with parents and I tell them how I want them to align with the vision of our school. But when you hear Catherine speak this morning, there was this underlying boldness that she exuded during her presentation. And one thing I can tell you is that younger school leaders struggle with this boldness. What advice would you give a 28-year-old, 30-year-old dean of students or dean of academics, or even headmaster sitting here today saying, I don't think I can have that conversation with my parents. I'm afraid I might say something that's not politically correct that will come back and haunt me. And these fears are just running in the minds of our younger leaders. What advice would you give them regarding engagement with parents?
I'll take a stab at that. We do a lot of leadership development at the Society for Classical Learning, and a lot of consulting. Keith and I do a lot, and David as well. We also serve, Keith and I, as the co-directors of the Gordon College Classical Leadership Program, and spend a lot of time with younger leaders, coaching, mentoring, consulting. And what I would say is, don't try to be Catherine. That's not wise. We have a theme of prudence in the leadership development and training that we do. And you need to know yourself well, which is a fundamental element of exercising prudence. And there are some people who are wired that way and has very high capacity and wakes up at 3 o'clock in the morning and starts telling their teachers what to do. And she's really good and exceptional, but you don't need to be her. You need to be the leader that you're called to be. And that means you do need to be bold, of course, and have courage and exercise those virtues, but within yourself, not trying to do that with the assumption you should be emulating some other leader necessarily. I also think if you're a young leader, any new head of school in particular needs a coach and a mentor. This is very complicated work, especially if you're very young. I don't think anybody should go it alone in a head of school position, or probably any executive level position at one of our schools. So it would be very wise to get a mentor and a coach as soon as you're able.
Yeah, and I would say, again, we have a young, talented, first-time principal, and my message to her all the time is, as long as the decisions that you're making are grounded in high expectations and tied to the 4 cardinal virtues of courage, justice, temperance, and wisdom, I've got your back. There's an entire team that has your back. And there's nothing like feeling that, knowing that you have a force of good that's standing up and standing behind your decision. So that's the message constantly. Again, Catherine said earlier today, oh my God, now I'm forgetting the phrase.
She said a lot.
What's that?
I said she said a lot.
No. She said, hold the line.
Hold the line, yeah.
Stay with me.
Stay with me.
The things we do in life echo in eternity.
That's right.
Oh my gosh.
So beautiful.
Imagine if someone's saying that to you, you're a rocket, let's do it.
I would say also, if you are enmeshed in a vision that's already articulated, you don't have to have your own personal authority being the only thing that's operating. And if you can root your authority in the mission and vision and the principles of the school, even by, I think when I was a young leader, I would quote, the mission statement or quote from our faculty manual about any time I wanted to say something authoritative, because there's low-hanging fruit of borrowed authority. It's very helpful.
I was just going to say, one of the things we haven't talked about yet, which I think is really important, we've talked about parents who may or may not understand and committed to the habits that the school is committed to, or the students' time and technology, but I really do think that's important that we understand the ways in which we tend to miss it in the areas that we're responsible for. And I think one way that I've observed in being at this for a while now, visiting a lot of schools, is our tendency towards idealism in the classroom and in our model, which is great on one hand because we have very high aspirational aims to cultivate wisdom and virtue in all of our students, and we should aim very high. But sometimes that causes us to miss the messiness and the realities of the day-to-day student that's sitting right in front of us. And I think we have to be very self-conscious about the challenges that are real in meeting students where they are and not missing them because of our over-idealized ambitions.
Great. I love that. And what I heard the panelists say to our younger leaders is that opting out of having difficult conversations, opting out of having conversations about truth and what you all believe in is not an option. What we all need is courage. And courage is not just choosing to triumph over your fear. Courage also encompasses the boldness and the steadfastness to stay on course. And so, if you're sitting here thinking, you know what, I'll just avoid that conversation, it's too hard. What I'm hearing all of them say is that, no, don't avoid the conversation, because it's part of what helps build that culture and help our parents be grounded in the culture. I'll open it up to questions. I think we can take about 2 questions. What's on your mind for our panelists?
I have a kind of an outline question, but I'm deeply involved in developing culture of 11th and 12th graders. And I'm also the parent of 11th and 12th graders and college students. And one of the things that I notice, and I work for Greathearts School, one of the things that I notice is that our students struggle with having grown up and being cultivated in a very rich culture for their K through 12. And then they don't know how to think about culture when they make their college decisions. And so I have a lot of my graduates come back, especially their freshman year, and they're shattered. They feel like they've been cheated in some way, that the culture that they believed was true and good and beautiful, then they don't see when they're adults, and yet they're not going to get that everywhere they go. And so I think my question is, how can we as educators focus on that deliberateness of what our older teenagers are going through, our 11th and 12th graders, and so that they can have conversations with their parents about the necessity of culture, not just when they're under the authority of their parents and teachers, but then when they're choosing culture for themselves when they go into higher education.
I think it's really important to start with help parents and students know that that they need to think first and foremost about their continued formation at college. So that's where it starts. You're not fully formed. You've been blessed. But this is unusual. You need to go into college knowing that you need community and culture that will feed. It won't be natural. So it's organic where you are now. It probably won't be organic. There are some schools where it will be more organic and built in. Those need to be considered, probably in increasing measure in our day. But some don't have that option. But going in knowing where Christian community is, where to find the kind of culture that will feed them, and know that in the first few weeks of their college experience, that has to be sought out, or the stats are not very good.
So we spend a lot of time thinking about this question of how do we prepare our kids for their post-secondary experience. And what we've come to is that we actually want to create immersive college and career experiences during your high school experience. So literally right now, it's winter break in New York City right now, but right now we have two of our 9th grade students are at Fordham University in their winter break workshop on artificial intelligence, a great STEM experience. On March 2nd, 25 of our female students, 9th graders, are going to U.S. Naval Academy in Annapolis, Maryland for a convocation for astronauts. So they're going to be using the space simulator that the NASA astronauts do. And then Smith College has just agreed that 4 of our female students, Smith College is a great all-women's college, 4 of our female students are guaranteed to do a 2-week workshop at Smith College this summer in either their science and engineering or creative writing workshop. We're also going to have partnerships with the Mayo Clinic for doing apprenticeships and internships in New York City-based hospitals. The idea is that we want every student during their high school experience to have the kinds of experiences that help prepare them for what they will actually be doing post-secondary, and hopefully help them make better decisions about what post-secondary pathways they choose.
If I can just add one other comment, I think helping especially those older students, 11th and 12th graders, to recognize the agency that they have in culture building is really important. So it can be a trap to talk about our school culture as something that we've created this ideal thing and you've been a part of it, as opposed to helping them to realize you're actually the ones that build this, right? We're trying to facilitate a kind of culture, but in those older grades, the way that you behave, the way that you act, what you do in the classroom, what you do in the hallways, what you do in the lunchroom, how you interact with younger students, that's the culture. And so by helping them to start think of it that way, I think it helps them when they do leave to go out and say, oh, this is a new context, and instead of just, I had it nice before and now it's, my idealism has been shattered, they have a kind of agency like, oh, I can build into this and I can contribute and give also.
Okay, we'll take one more question. I'm so sorry. Our time is far spent. I'm sorry.
Hi, could you please just, I realize that this is on culture and leadership and all of that. There's been quite a bit of discussion about Christian schools. Could you please parse out a little bit of the difference between the cultures of a classical Christian academy and a classical public charter academy, and how we, one, how we partner together, but also how we are, in fact, different things?
Sure. A couple of things. I mean, I think from the outset there is clearly alignment in terms of the ideals. I think the way, for example, Great Hearts articulates their aims in truth, goodness, and beauty, and the cultural norms, and all of those things, do not have distinct Christian language to them, but are pointed absolutely in the same direction towards the good. So I think while there are a lot of specific differences that make its way in the life of the culture, for example, as I mentioned, characterizing the parents' responsibility in terms of their God-given responsibility, you're not going to use that kind of language. But I don't think that limits you from taking those principles and call them common good principles and applying them across your culture, things that I think that you're already doing and doing very well. So, and if I inverted that, I would say, what we're aiming to do as distinctly Christian institutions, we want to see pour out into the public good, culture making. And we don't want our students to be so insulated that they don't have a vision for extending the reach of what's good outside of the walls, that they were formed in. So there's a lot of things more we could say about that, but I think while it's important to distinguish the particulars, there's a lot of overlap in what it is we're doing.
Okay. Sadly, we've come to the end of this session. I'm so sorry. I would have loved for you to hear from these great men. But the good news I have for you is that you can join us tomorrow at 9:30. These same men will be talking about intentional school leadership at 9:30 in room 124A. And so if you have more questions, I promise I'll create more time for questions tomorrow. It's also worthy of note to say that this panel discussion was sponsored by Bria Schools Network in New York. And so we want to thank them for sponsoring this session. Well, thank you so much for your time. I look forward to chatting with you again tomorrow at 9:30, and I would love to see some of you join us again tomorrow. Enjoy your lunch. Thank you. Short enough. I prefer to stand.